Hello, everyone, and welcome to the My Healthy Home Summit. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Caroline Blazovsky. I'm a national healthy home expert and an environmental residential consultant with over 24 years of experience. This summit is designed to educate you about the process of creating a healthy home, to learn how our homes may affect our health and wellness, and the benefits associated with living and working in healthier spaces. We've compiled the most decorated speakers in this arena to help you on your journey. Today, we're joined by guest Nikki Krueger, who will be discussing moisture in our houses and the benefits to controlling humidity to create a healthy home. Welcome, Nikki Krueger. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are thrilled to have you.
Thank you, Caroline. Excited to be here.
As a leading moisture and humidity expert, can you start by giving us a quick synopsis of your background and how you got a passion for creating healthier homes?
Sure. So I've been in the indoor air quality industry for over 20 years now. About 15 years dedicated on moisture control and the importance of ventilation in homes as well. My passion really is just from understanding more and more how much moisture impacts not only our health, but our comfort and also the sustainability of our homes.
And so, prior to getting into the industry, you can talk a little bit about where you work now, but what were your passions and what were your interests going through school and your education?
Sure. I think to some extent, the indoor air quality has always been a part of my life. As I had a brother growing up who would have asthma attacks out of nowhere, so we always had to have an artificial Christmas tree, or suddenly he would go outside and all of a sudden he'd be in the emergency room because we didn't know that he was allergic to grass and someone was mowing their grass. So a large part of growing up was living with somebody with respiratory issues. So I have a background in communications and public relations specifically, which always drove me to understand more about the topics that I was talking about. And as I dove deeper and deeper into how our homes are changing with being built tighter and tighter, and our construction materials that we're using in our homes and how that might be affecting our house. I just dove in. And then at about 3 years old, my daughter had her first asthma attack. And that really changes everything. When you have a child that is suffering and you're not really sure what the triggers are, as a parent, you're looking for answers. And so that's when I really dove deep into the environment in the home and how I can try to control it and make it as healthy for her as possible.
And it's interesting, a lot of our speakers, and most of our speakers, have this thread that runs through us, right? Something's happened, and we've taken that and taken lemons and made lemonade out of it. So it's fascinating to hear everybody's personal stories because we all kind of have one that led us to this industry. So let's kind of get right into it. Obviously, we have listeners and an audience from very vast backgrounds. So we kind of want to talk about moisture. We want to talk about why it's problematic in our homes and why it leads to all sorts of health related issues. So if you can start by kind of talking about the major sources of where moisture comes from in a house.
Sure. So first and foremost, when I'm speaking with homeowners or professionals that are working in a home to solve a moisture issue, I like to know what is going on below the home. So usually a crawl space or a basement is where I would start, because almost 50% of the air that's below the home will make its way into the living space. So if we've got a vented crawl space in a humid climate, we're probably going to want to address that first, or a basement, because basements being below ground are always going to typically have higher humidity in those areas. So if we can control the moisture down there, it might improve the living space by just doing that. Especially basements now that, a lot of times they're finished areas. So we've got playrooms or our living rooms, bedrooms down there now. So we do need to make sure that we are creating the most healthy environment down there. And typically that is going to be controlling the moisture.
It's a huge factor. I don't think people realize that. I just kind of want you to repeat it again because it's huge. That 50% of that air upstairs in our living spaces comes from the basement.
Yeah, up to. And then that a lot of that is going to be driven by the stack effect of the home, especially. And so, when we turn on our HVAC systems in our homes, that's going to be bringing air from below those spaces. A lot of times we see in crawl spaces that the HVAC system is located in that crawl space. And if we're not controlling that moisture, we're going to have leaks in our ductwork. We're going to be pulling that air in from below there. So we want to make sure that it's as clean and dry a space as possible where our mechanical systems are located.
And just to kind of touch with people, where are a lot of these mechanical systems located in a home?
Yeah, so we've got a crawl space, a basement, or the attic. If we get lucky, we've got a mechanical room in the home. But the challenge is a lot of times builders or homeowners don't want to give up space inside the home for the actual mechanical system. And it's the best location for that system is in a home or in a enclosed conditioned space. So if we've got a crawl space, let's get it closed up and let's put the mechanical system down there. Or if it's an attic, a lot of times in the South, we'll see HVAC systems located in vented attics. We need to get that closed up as much as possible, especially if you are concerned about the air quality in the home.
And then also sometimes even garages. Garages are another hidden space
You
for
are correct.
HVAC.
Yes. Yes, we do see that quite a bit as well. And the scary part about garages, especially or a vented crawl space or a crawl space, is a lot of times people like to use those for storage of their gasoline cans and their paint and their paint thinners and all those chemicals that we really should be keeping completely out of the home in a separate shed, not even anywhere where we could be getting those fumes, but that's oftentimes where we do store them.
I think a lot of customers and clients often think that because their ductwork is sealed, that this is like a hermetically sealed system. They don't realize that there are cracks and crevices where airflow can just get pulled into that system, and whatever's around that is going to become game for that
Yeah.
process.
And it's not only that, I mean, we can get it as tight, as attached as tight as possible. But unfortunately, because the ductwork is often located in areas where we're not inspecting them regularly, we can get, rodents that chew a hole, or we have other contractors coming in to work in those spaces and accidentally disconnect something, which I see all the time. And homeowners don't realize it. So it is one of those that if we can keep our mechanicals in our living space envelope, which, if we condition the attic or condition the crawl space or we have it in the basement, at least the air that is escaping or being sucked in is hopefully in a cleaner environmentally controlled area. It's still not ideal, but it's better.
So when you talk about conditioning, let's explain that. So when we're talking about if you have your HVAC down in a basement or a crawl space, what do you mean when you're saying conditioning? So what do you want to
So
see in that space?
it's typically in an area that hopefully has been air sealed as much as possible, which means that we're stopping the infiltration coming from the outside, or exfiltration, meaning that the air in our home has easy pathways outside. We want to air seal our homes as much as possible to minimize the communication. And then we want to make sure that we're insulated well. And then what we're doing is when we use our HVAC system to create heating and cooling, it means that we're in a space that's being conditioned. And then we add a dehumidifier to control the moisture, which it makes, in a crawl space, really that's the only condition we need at that point, because we've air sealed it as much as possible. So we're minimizing the communication between the ground and the outside. And if we add a dehumidifier, we are conditioning it, meaning the moisture is controlled. Because usually when you're below ground, there's very little temperature differentiation from the outside to in that space. It's going to be fairly close to the living space temperature, just a little cooler. So all we really care about down there is the moisture. We just don't want to create anything bad down there.
So people often say they don't have leaks, right? So the obvious, the big elephant in the room is: do we have a leak? Do we have water infiltration? Are we seeing water in our basement? But there's a lot more to just seeing water. So can you kind of explain about how water or water vapor appears there in that space, but it has nothing to do with the leak?
Sure. So if there is a leak, that has to be addressed. A dehumidifier is not going to be able to uh, fix a home that is having issues due to a water leak. That has to be addressed first. But what we address with a dehumidifier is water vapor, meaning that it's coming in. I mean, we have infiltration, which you're never going to be airtight. We're not living in yetis. We can breathe in our homes. If we can breathe in our homes, that means that we've got air infiltration somewhere. We want to minimize it as much as possible, but we're always going to have it. Plus, we need mechanical ventilation in our home in order to make sure that we're getting outdoor air, to be able to dilute the contaminants in the air. And when we bring in outdoor air for mechanical ventilation, which is code now in new construction in most states, you're going to be bringing in that moisture from the outside as well. If you're in a mixed humid or humid climate, anywhere where you have green grass growing outside, we typically say that you're going to need dehumidification in some part of your home during some part of the year. So a lot of the moisture can come from the outside, below in the ground, and then also people generate moisture. Each person generates about a quarter a pound of moisture just from breathing, and then about another quarter a pound from activities in the home, cleaning, cooking, showering. So a family of four will generate about 2 pints or pounds. A pint's a pound the world around. So if you ever hear anybody talk about a pint of moisture, a pound of moisture, it's the same thing. But a family of four generates about 2 pints of moisture an hour when they're home. And what we know from COVID is people were spending a lot of time in their homes, and we're generating a lot of moisture, and a lot of people are still working from home. So it used to be, that we'd get up in the morning, we'd go to school, we'd go to work, we'd be gone for 10 hours during the day. Then we'd come home and make dinner and do our activities and go to bed. And maybe things seemed a little off in the house. Maybe there was a musty smell, or maybe it was uncomfortable because of the moisture, but because we were coming and going so much, we just didn't do anything about it. But now we're home a lot more. And so, 90% of our time is spent either in our homes or in our office space, right? So it's affecting people's health, I think. And we all educated ourselves a lot in the last couple of years on the importance of indoor air quality.
Yeah, completely. But I think people still, I think if they don't see a leak and they don't see a flood and they don't see something break, they don't understand that moisture becomes such a big issue, and that we are expelling all of this moisture in all of our activities in the home can put moisture in. So let's talk a little bit about, forget that you haven't had a leak. It's just your
Yeah.
home. And you say, well, I don't see moisture. It looks dry in my home. So let's tell them, one, how they need to monitor to see if they have this problem. And then we're going to talk about the health risks and
Yeah.
implications of having moisture.
So, first and foremost, if you've got a basement or a crawl space and there is a moisture issue, you're probably going to smell that musty odor. And that is moisture driven. Even if you don't see mold, but you've got that smell, it is because there probably is mold somewhere. You're just not seeing it. And then, feeling uncomfortable. So the ideal humidity range in a home during the spring, summer, and fall is going to be 50% relative humidity. And that's at about 75 degrees. And it's important that we understand that relative humidity is a number that's relative to a temperature. So if someone calls me and says, I have a humidity issue in my home, my humidity is 70%, I'm going to ask them what the temperature is in their home also, because temperature is going to drive what that relative humidity is. If I'm at 70% relative humidity at 50 degrees, that might not be a lot of moisture in the air because it's a matter of relative to the temperature. Now, if I increase that temperature to 70 degrees, the relative humidity is going to go down. So for every degree that you change the temperature, the relative humidity is going to either go up or down 2%. So what we really care about is the dew point. And that's where we're going to see condensation. So if you look outside on a spring morning or a fall morning and you see dew on the grass, that means the temperature hit dew point. And so dew point is going to tell us where we have the potential for condensation. So two things we need to know is what's the dew point, and then the relative humidity relative to a temperature.
And so, what's the easiest way for a homeowner to get that information?
Yes, and that we have hygrometers. So we can go on, online or to a retail store and buy a hygrometer that we can put in our home that will measure the relative humidity. Now, what you need to understand about those is there's sensors in those typically are going to be plus or minus about 5%. But it's going to give you an idea of how close you are to that relative humidity. So if we can keep it in our homes about 50, what most people don't understand is that if you do have indoor allergies, 85% of the people who have indoor allergies are allergic to dust mites. And if you can be below 55%, around that 50% relative humidity, they go dormant. So if that is one of the things that's causing respiratory issues for you, then keeping that relative humidity controlled to that. And again, to your point, you got to monitor it because you got to know. You got to know what you're dealing with here. Another thing that relative humidity in our homes affects from a health standpoint is the higher the relative humidity, the larger amount of off-gassing is going to happen with the products that are in your home. So everything that you bring in is made up of some sort of chemicals, whether it's the glue that they're using to, glue things together, or the material on your couch. Everything is going to off-gas some volatile organic compounds, VOCs. And the higher the humidity, the larger amount of off-gassing is going to happen in a short amount of time, which can affect people's health as well.
So let's just recap a little bit. So let's just talk about, we need a monitor.
Yes.
We've got to be looking for a relative humidity around 50%. If we want to reduce dust mites, because we've got so many people listening to this who, and dust mites are a huge problem. We actually had a speaker, one of our experts talked about that prior to the 1960s, the dust mite population was much less. And that was because of the fact that the houses were just breathing. And if there was any moisture that got into the house, it would dry out instantly. So the dust mites, when you did sampling, you wouldn't find dust mites. Now in our houses, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, our houses are much tighter, much more energy efficient. So that moisture has no way to get out. Can you kind of talk about that? Like, why, when we have moisture now, is it such a problem?
Yeah. So our goal for having an energy efficient home is to make it as tight as possible. And so the largest system in the house, the HVAC system, runs as little as possible. And our houses used to be leaky. We had a leaky home. And so we'd get wet during the spring, summer, fall, the wet season. But then the winter would come and we would dry. So as long as you're wetting and drying and wetting and drying, it typically isn't too much of a problem. You might be uncomfortable, come late summer, fall, because a lot of moisture is built up in the house. But as soon as that winter came and the drier air was outside and we turned on the heat, that house was going to dry. Now we're building our homes tight to be as energy efficient as possible. We've got to bring in that outdoor air in order to try to help with a healthy air change in our house to dilute contaminants or to expel them out of the house. But the challenge is that we're tight. We're keeping all that moisture in that we're generating, plus we're bringing it in from the outside, and now it's trapped. So even before, in the wintertime, where maybe you added a humidifier to a house
Mm,
because it was
right.
dry, we're getting people saying in the wintertime, I need a dehumidifier because I've got so much condensation on my windows. And really, all you need to do is bring in more outdoor air in the wintertime because it's drier air. But yeah, our houses are tight. And, when you don't run your AC as much, because now you're a tight envelope, or the you've air sealed it, and the AC doesn't have to run as much, which is great from the standpoint that you're not running it to cool. But also, that was what we were using to dry our homes, was the air conditioner. That's a byproduct, right? We removed water by trying to get to that temperature set point. And if we minimize that, then we've taken away that drying mechanism. And so now we need something that solely focuses on getting to a set relative humidity.
So for people who don't understand, when you have an HVAC system and you're running your air conditioning, that's why when it runs, you don't feel all sticky and stuffy, and you that humidity is removed from the air as your HVAC runs. And so when our systems run shorter duration for energy efficiency, we get to a temperature quickly. However, we don't take out that moisture. So kind of explain how humidity and temperature make you feel, right? You can be at 80 degrees and have low relative humidity but feel completely dry, like
Yeah.
if you go to Arizona or something.
Yeah, exactly. That's the example I always use. You can be 90 degrees in Phoenix, Arizona, and 90 degrees in Miami, and you're probably miserable in Miami. But Phoenix, you're like, this is great. Let's go play some golf, right? So, yeah, humidity. Um, when there's higher humidity, what happens is that you're sweating on your skin, but it's not evaporating. So
Interesting.
and that's why we often say, and there's studies out there that say, when you control your relative humidity, that you can actually increase your thermostat and feel 2 to 3 degrees and feel just as comfortable. So you can actually, when you're running your AC, instead of having it at 72 because you've been uncomfortable, you can set it to 75, and you'll be just as comfortable if you're controlling that relative humidity to, around 50, 55%. So it is interesting that it's, I can't tell you that you're going to save money energy wise, because you are going to have to make some changes, because there's some people who will say, no way, I only am comfortable at 70 degrees in my house. Well, if you add a dehumidifier and keep it at 50%, that 70 degrees is going to feel cold in a home.
That's amazing because we get so many clients who say that. They say, I can't, I got to have it down at 68. I
Yeah.
start sweating. And just think, if you added a dehumidifier, you actually could keep your temperature much higher, or at least a couple degrees higher, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the thing with the dehumidifier, and making sure that we're getting dehumidification throughout our house. While it's an important part of our indoor air quality strategy, it also means you're going to be more comfortable, and it's also a durability tool for your home as well, right? I mean, if you control humidity below the home, usually you can stop. I mean, for pest control contractors, that's an integrated pest management approach by controlling the moisture and minimizes the colonization of pests. You protect the wood in your home as well. If you have wood flooring in your home, and you start having issues with it buckling or cupping, when you call your wood flooring manufacturer for a warranty claim, they're going to say, well, how are you controlling the moisture in your home?
Mm.
Because if you're not, they're probably not going to cover it. So, when it comes to dehumidification and controlling moisture, it's much more than just our health, which I think makes it so much more of an important aspect of understanding.
So we've talked about by first monitoring relative humidity,
Yeah.
making sure that we're staying within the healthy parameters. And what are those? Just to recap, what do you think the
Yep.
healthy
Well,
parameter would be?
during the humid times of the year, spring, summer, and fall, we want to make sure for health reasons we're at 50. We don't ever want to go above 60. But if for health reasons we want to be at about 50. Now in the wintertime, if you can get to 30%, if you're in a dry climate, that would be the goal. So between 30 and 60% is where the recommendations are, depending on the time of the year. And then 50 is ideal for health during the humid season.
And for people who just say, okay, well, I'm just going to make it as dry as possible. And I'm just like going to take out all the moisture because moisture is bad and it leads to mold and bugs and dust mites. What's the downside to going too low?
Yeah, first of all, it's going to be very expensive, very energy intensive to try to do that. Plus, the materials in your home do need some moisture in them. Like I said, your wood floors, your wood cabinets. And if you get too dry, I mean, if you go to Canada in the wintertime, you're going to realize that how just breathing is going to be uncomfortable in your nose. It's going to be too dry. So we've got these recommendations, of where we should be for a reason.
And so let's just also talk about. So we talked about. Let's talk about mold a little bit because we've got a lot of speakers talking about mold and mycotoxin. We know that's a hot issue now. Everybody's sort of talking about we don't want to have mold in our homes. Explain how controlling humidity can benefit us in that manner.
Sure. So what we want to do with a dehumidifier is create an environment that makes it hard for mold to grow. So if we keep it below 60%, um, it is hard for mold to grow in the home. If you're above 70%, it takes about 72 hours for mold to start growing in a home. So if you've got condensation, so that means we're at a temperature where we've hit dew point and now we've got water droplets starting to materialize on materials. That's the fastest way mold's going to grow, right? Is because we've hit dew point, and we see that in crawl spaces where we've got, let's say, water pipelines where that moisture is coming in from the outside, condensing. Closets, right? A lot of times in closets, people pull out their moldy shoes, and we've got an area where we've got condensation happening. Now, if we have high relative humidity, but we haven't hit, we're not at dew point. What happens is when we have high relative humidity, all the materials in our home are absorbing moisture. So a lot of times when I get calls because mold is being seen, it's usually August, September, and October. And that's because all the materials in the house come spring, when it starts raining, start absorbing that moisture.
Mhm.
And then by August, the materials are saying, okay, we can't absorb anymore. So now it's starting to collect on the surface. So you might not see water or moisture on the surface, but it's these little molecules are starting to build up on the surface, and then we've got the potential for mold growth when that happens. So we want to make sure that we are removing moisture in the home to that 50% in order to minimize the materials just getting to a point where they can't absorb any more moisture.
Is that just a natural process that occurs from season to season? So when people are, is that just the processes of our environment? I mean, this
It
happens,
is.
I guess, outside with our trees, but because everything can dry out, we have fresh air that it doesn't happen outside as much.
Exactly. And in the house, again, we used to have homes that were a lot leakier. So our homes would get really dry in the wintertime, and all those materials would dry out. And then come spring, they would start absorbing and get to the point. But now we're trapping so much moisture in our homes. We're just not drying like we used to.
Mm, incredible. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits. So we said that mold, and we're going to deter mold. You touched on pests a little bit. So that's a big issue because we have a lot of
Yep.
people talking about in the summit the detriments we see with pesticide, the health implications of using herbicides and pesticides. And how can we control the pests by using dehumidification? If you can touch on that a bit.
Yeah. So, pests typically like wet materials, and that's what's going to attract them to the home is these wet materials. So, if we can keep them dry, where we're not having more wood moisture content issues and other surfaces materials that aren't wet attracting those, like I said, it's part of an integrated pest management approach, and that's why we work so closely with the pest control professionals, because they want to minimize spraying chemicals as much as possible too. And so this is another way to help homeowners, especially ones that are sensitive to those chemicals, to be able to control pests more with a drier environment.
I think that's huge because we have so many people watching the summit about health and wellness. I mean, we have almost 2 million invitees who are concerned about not spraying, but for many reasons, right? Maybe they have multiple chemical sensitivity, maybe they have
Hmm.
allergies, asthma, and we know these petroleum based pesticides stay around for a very long time. They adhere to a substance and it's 25 years, 30 years, they have no breakdown and those chemicals can stay in your home. So we kind of want to minimize that as much as we can. And it sounds like with a dehumidifier, we can do all this and not have to spray insecticides.
Yeah, and I would say, I have a lot of conversations with homeowners that have crawl spaces, and they're like, okay, well, I closed my crawl space. So I blocked off the vents, I put a good vapor barrier down, the doors sealed tight. And so I've brought my crawl space into part of my living space now. But then my crawl space contractor, one of the ways to meet code when you close a crawl space is to use supply air from the air conditioning system in that space in order to provide dry, cooled air. And for me, I would say, especially if they've got some sort of sensitivity to chemicals, that you don't want to be sharing air from your home with your crawl space, which also means that crawl space air is going to make its way into the living space. I say try to keep those two areas separated as much as possible. And another way to meet code for conditioning a crawl space is to just put a dehumidifier down there, because that's really all you care about. If you're using an air conditioned air to condition your crawl space, that air is being controlled by a thermostat in the living space, right? So it's all based on how comfortable you are in your living space of what conditioned air makes its way into the crawl space to try to keep it dry. Well, the spring and fall are typically the wettest times. How much air conditioning do we really run in our spring and fall times? Not as
Not
much.
much.
And that's when we need that drying down there as much as possible, is usually in what we call shoulder seasons, which is the
Mm.
spring and fall. So I know that there's millions of crawl spaces that have been closed, and one of the ways that they're conditioning it is with that air conditioning air. And if someone's listening and there's they're concerned about that, then I would definitely explore maybe stopping that and putting in a dehumidifier just for that space.
And that space also typically, if your upstairs is at 72 and you're pumping air into that space, you may get very cold in that space, which can create conditions for more condensation too, as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we get rid of the pests, we prevent with dehumidification and controlling moisture chemicals from outgassing, right? Because that's a big
Yep.
concern. You spoke on that about reducing mold and mildew. How about explaining? We're talking about removing moisture from the house, these whole house units, because we're talking about basements. Do they
Yeah.
just need it in the basement or crawl space, or do we need it upstairs as well with these energy efficient
Yeah.
homes?
Yeah. So I would say that, first of all, if we've controlled the moisture below and we still got a humidity issue in the rest of the house, or if your house is built on a slab,
Mm.
which construction practices more and more are going to houses built on a slab, then we'll need to look at adding a whole house ventilating dehumidifier to the HVAC system. And when I say ventilating, that means with our units, you can bring in outdoor air um, in order to get outdoor ventilation air. We have MERV 13 filters in our dehumidifiers, which is very important, especially if we're bringing in outdoor air to get as much of that contaminants out. And then what you do is you tie that ductwork from the whole house dehumidifier to the ductwork of the HVAC system. So we get dehumidified air throughout the entire home, which is especially important for bedrooms because we spend a large part of our time in our bedrooms, and especially overnight times when it seems, I know it's my daughter, her asthma always acted up at night. That's when she was always coughing. It was always at nighttime. But to really make sure that our bedrooms are being managed for moisture as well. So regardless of the air conditioning runtime, this dehumidifier will come on and keep it at the set point that you set it to, hopefully around that 50%, regardless of whatever else is going on in the home.
Well, we talked a little bit about slabs. Let's explain that. So you can be built on different types of foundation. So just talk
Yes.
a little bit about, some people have a crawl space, some people have a basement, or maybe
Yep.
a
And so,
slab, and explain.
yeah. And so in the South and Southeast, I would say the Southeast and the Mid Atlantic, crawl spaces are popular. So, we have a foundation that's kind of built up. And then we have wood, and then our house goes on top of that. So, a basement, very popular in the Northeast. Mid Atlantic has quite a bit of those as well. And then also the Midwest. Northeast, we see a lot of times crawl spaces, but dew points are typically low in the Northeast. It's interesting because it rains a lot out there, but the dew points are fairly low, so we're not getting a lot of problems in typically as we have seen in the past. Now, what's interesting about the Northeast is building code is incentivizing builders to put their mechanicals in closed spaces. So we would see a lot of times the HVAC system in a crawl space or an attic that was vented, and now they're saying, well, builder, we're going to give you incentives to put them in closed spaces. So now we're seeing moisture issues where we hadn't seen moisture issues before. So again, no good deed goes unpunished, right? That's just the way it goes. But a slab would be where they just pour the concrete, and then the house would be built on top of that concrete slab. We don't have a basement or crawl space. And of course, we know concrete has a lot of water in it. So that's going to take a while for that moisture to come out, but it's always going to be absorbing moisture as well. So, the first 3 to 5 years of building a new home, there's going to be a lot of drying for materials. And so there's going to be a lot of moisture just from the materials alone in that house. So we'll need to make sure that we're drying with a dehumidifier. But yeah, so it's all different kinds of foundations. But we do know that building code is trying to address our indoor air quality, and typically that is with ventilation. And depending on where you live, the outdoor air might not be better than the air inside your house. So we got to make sure that we're, have proper filtration and other indoor air quality products to make sure that we're addressing that as well.
And you talked about code a little bit. I want to
Yeah.
touch on this because we have some really profound speakers who are people who write code, right?
Yeah.
And they really made us aware that the consumers are not protected as they think they are. So whatever the code is, you need to be 10 steps above the code to be making sure your home is healthy. Like the code's bare minimum. So can you kind of touch on that a little bit about, like, people think, oh, well, I buy my house, I should just be protected against humidity. They have
Yeah.
no concept of why they're not. So can you kind of just touch on
Yeah.
codes and how they may protect us, but they're really not where they need to be?
And I think code, I mean, code is looking at safety of the house, but not necessarily from the standpoint of health, like your breathing and your respiratory. Because the challenge with that, even with our ventilation codes, they're adding mechanical ventilation because they recognize that there's the buildup of contaminants in the house, but it's really hard to know what the right amount is, because what might affect my health
Yes.
might not affect your health. So we have no hard number to understand. First of all, the inside of every house is different.
Yeah.
The chemicals, the makeup, of the air. So it's really hard to understand. Now, what I would say is, there's a program by the Environmental Protection Agency called Indoor Air Plus. And that specifically looks at, if you're building a new home and you want to address the indoor air quality, there are builders that can follow the checklist for Indoor Air Plus. If you are building a net zero energy home, or ready home, it has to meet the Indoor Air Plus guidelines. So it's not part of code. It's more of a green building standard program, or an energy efficiency standard program. But there is a program by the EPA that you can look at and say, if you're building a new home, I would like these guidelines as part of it. And then I think you also need to say specifically these ones, because I know that's what's going to affect my health the most. And so as a consumer, as a homeowner, you've got to be very proactive, because what affects your health might not affect someone else's. And so you've got to be very active in that.
Yeah, I think we spoke a lot about the occupants. Every occupant is going to make a different space. No home is
Yes.
identical.
No,
So
not at
different. I
all.
mean, how many homes have you seen? I mean, you've seen thousands of homes, and they're all different, right?
And everybody living in them is different. And that's, somebody living there could have lived there 15 years and never had a problem. And then someone, and we work with a lot of people that, have compromised immune systems and that are very sensitive. And so trying to figure out what is going to work for their health in that home. And, I've had times where we just couldn't. I mean, I've had to have, homeowners have had to move. You just don't know what's going on in the homes. So you've got to be very, and I learned this with my daughter is, the doctors wanted to give us, use the nebulizer, use the steroids. I mean, she was a different child when she was on those steroids. And it's like, this can't be the solution every time. We've got to look at what's going on in our environment that is causing this to happen, because it was always at home.
Interesting.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
Can you give a couple of scenarios where you went in, worked on some homes, controlled the humidity, helped with moisture control, and there was such a big positive? Just talk about what the positivity that came out of it, health implications. I'd like to
Yeah.
hear how you made people better.
Well, and we've got a couple. I think the most the one that I worked on and made a big impact professionally and personally for me was a family that moved into a home down in Austin, and their son already was having some compromised immune problems. And after they moved in this home, it just, I mean, his health just spiraled out of control bad. And what they finally figured out was that the HVAC system was located above his room, and one of the condensate lines had a crack and wasn't actually draining out of the house. So in the wall behind his bed ended up being filled with mold. Now, again, a dehumidifier isn't going to fix that, right? But they went in, they fixed everything up, they remediated. But because his immune system was so sensitive at that point, we had to make sure that we were controlling the humidity as, down to that 50%, that we had outdoor air, we had good filtration. Indoor air quality is usually a solution of systems. Sometimes controlling the relative humidity solely by itself will help somebody, but you might have to add better filtration to the house. There might be other things that you have. Removing stuff from the home that is affecting people is first and foremost, right? That's indoor air quality 101. Don't bring it into your house. if you can help it. But we also know that it's not realistic. But yeah, I've had a lot of ones that I've worked on that, and then I hear from the family, and the there everything that we have done, all the steps that we have done, controlling the humidity was the most impactful after that. And it means a lot. It really does. It's powerful to hear these messages that when we can minimize the exposure to contaminants, how it helps.
Yeah, I completely agree. And these aren't, controlling humidity is it's quite a simple thing in theory. I mean, you can really make a big impact by putting in a dehumidifier. And let's just talk a little bit about the differences because people say, okay, I'm going to go down to my local hardware store and buy a dehumidifier. And that's not really what we're talking about here. In certain
Yeah,
climates, a dehumidifier from a box store will work. But
yeah,
I'm looking at people incorporating more things or what we call commercial grade dehumidifiers. Can you
yeah.
just talk about commercial grade dehumidifiers and how they differ than a box store dehumidifier?
Yeah. So, commercial grade dehumidifiers, like the ones that we manufacture, the components use commercial compressors and other components from. We actually manufacture restoration equipment, and large commercial dehumidifiers. So we take these components that we know are going to last and work at conditions, especially in cooler areas like a crawl space. That's usually about 65 degrees. If you were to go out and buy a dehumidifier from a big box store, what's going to happen typically with that unit is the coils are going to freeze up, and it's going to remove a lot less water, potentially no water if it freezes up too much. I remember that as a kid, that my parents would buy one of those and put it in the basement, and you turn it past that one, it'd be a solid block of ice, and they would have to. But yeah, so our dehumidifiers will run at cooler conditions and remove um, a lot more water than the ones from the big box store. Plus, we've got a 6 year warranty on our dehumidifier. So a lot of ones that you buy from those big box stores have about a 1 year warranty. And our factory and our headquarters is located in Madison, Wisconsin. So we are, if you call the 1-800 number, you're going to get somebody sitting in Madison, Wisconsin, that is going to be there to help you as well.
I see that we're getting up on our time, but we like to do a little fast round. So I want to do some quick questions, and it helps our audience to kind of learn who you are, and it's interesting because it strikes up some questions about what we're talking about today. So first question we want to know is, what is your favorite room in your home,
Mine would be my living room.
and why is that?
Because it's open to the rest of the house, to the kitchen and the dining room, and it just is a great gathering spot and where we entertain and enjoy most of our evenings. So yeah, mine would be the living room.
And what's your favorite activity to do in your home?
My favorite activity, I like cooking. And I enjoy doing DIY projects. So usually we've got some sort of project going on in the home that we're tackling. The latest one was the bathroom, renovating the bathroom. And again, when you start digging into projects, you got to be careful of what you wish for, because you're usually opening up a can of worms. And it's, when you buy an existing older home, 1950s homes, you're going to find problems for sure.
What did you find in your bathroom when you were digging around?
Oh yes. So when you start, if you see evidence of a little bit of mold on the outside, it's usually an indication when you open up that wall that there's going to be a lot more. So water leaks are pretty common in older homes for sure. And again, they're hidden. They're hidden unless you can see something going on. So yes, we had to tackle and do some remediation ourselves.
And so, um, what is something in your home from a health perspective, and from a healthy home perspective, that you haven't addressed yet that you know as an expert needs to be done?
Ventilation. So we had, a couple years ago. Um, we bought this house. It's 1950s home, and the original insulation was in the attic. And so it was, I mean, there's places with no insulation and there was places where it was compressed like this. So we had that cleaned out. We air sealed the ceiling of the home from the vented attic and had new insulation put in. And as soon as we did that, I noticed when I turned on my kitchen hood when I was cooking
Mm.
that I could smell, no matter what time of the year, I could smell our fireplace. So we wouldn't even have a fire going, but I could smell the ash from the fireplace. So I was sucking in from there as the makeup air. So I have exhaust air going out from my kitchen, and every CFM of air you have moving out of your house is going to make it up by sucking in from somewhere else. And mine was sucking in. So what I do now, as soon as that kitchen hood goes on, I open up a window, no matter what time of year or what's going on outside, in order to try to prevent that. So I need to add some sort of makeup air
Mhm.
to my house, to bring in outdoor air from a location that I know it can be filtered and is safe versus risking pulling in from my fireplace.
Fireplace. And they
Yeah.
also make you can install these in a kitchen. They look like tubes that go to the outside, right? With a filter and a
Yep.
louver that allows, as soon as it senses that air is getting pulled out, these little
Out.
vents open and you can
Yep.
pull air in. So just so people listening know that there's different ways that you can actually bring fresh air into that space to help.
Yep. And but we did the attic completely different time than we redid the kitchen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And never, I mean, it's, and again, anytime you do anything that's going to affect your home, on that kind of, caliber, it's going to affect someone. It's no deed goes unpunished.
That's
You
such a great point. Oh, I love that. Let's reiterate that you change something in the home and this happens. And I don't think any one of our speakers thus far has talked about this, whether it's tightening and then you create a radon problem. As soon as you go to change something, you need to think, how's this going to impact my
Yep.
space?
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. And I think one thing that I want to make sure that that your listeners understand is that a lot of times when they go to a HVAC professional, and say I have a moisture problem, they're going to say, well, let's switch out your HVAC system because that can handle removing the humidity.
Mhm.
And that is not always the answer. If your HVAC contractor says we have sized your HVAC, your air conditioner, to be able to handle the moisture, that means that when there is a call for cooling, that it should be able to handle the moisture at that time. But if it's not running, it's not removing moisture. And that again is typically going to be your overnight times and your shoulder seasons. So you might have to push a little bit more of that. No, I want it at 50%, no matter what, spring, summer, fall. And I want the system installed in order to be able to handle that.
Oh, I love that. So 50% all the time, not just when the HVAC is running.
Spring, summer, and fall.
Yep.
Yep. When it's the humid times, we say, yep.
Well, you are so knowledgeable. Where can people go to get scientific information about moisture, learn about the health benefits of reducing moisture from their home? Where do you think people can get the best information?
Yeah. So I think Indoor Air Plus, the EPA program, has a lot of great information on controlling moisture. And then also we've got a lot of information on our website, which is santa-fe-products.com. I write a lot of blog posts on there with new research studies, and information. And I think Building Science Corporation has a lot of great information as well that's free on their website on homes and controlling moisture.
And where can people get information about you and find out about what you're doing and the projects you're working on?
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn, Nikki Krueger, and then also on Instagram, Nikki Krueger _ IAQ.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. This is such a big topic, and we know homeowners are so concerned about all of the creepy crud that forms if they're not controlling moisture. So thank you. And we appreciate you very much for being here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.